Long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host and big god, Scott Daly, and I'm joined, as always, by my little god, Matt Friedman. How's it going today, Matt?
I may be little, but you can fit me in your pocket, so that's convenient.
I'm going to be honest with you. I thought you were going a different direction with that, and I was immediately nervous about where you were going to go with that. I may be little, but it could make you murder a child.
Yeah, that too.
This week, our 11-part coverage of Stephen King's Desperation continues as we cover chapters 4 and 5 of part 3. We're back, Matt. We took a week off. Hope everyone had a good holiday, but we're back. We basically ended on a cliffhanger last time and then made everyone wait 2 weeks. So, oops.
Yeah, that was very mean. And consequently, of course, I read this week's reading like almost 2 full weeks ago. So,
well, that was your choice, and I'm not going to feel bad about that.
That was my choice. But luckily, I have a perfect memory, as has been demonstrated over these past few weeks.
Well, in these chapters, in the wake of the Audrey reveal, our characters race to save David from her. Meanwhile, Tack has some more body swapping plans. Interesting couple of chapters this week, Matt. Like, there's a lot to talk about, and I think there's plenty for us to fill this episode with. But like, from a plot perspective, it's just like, here's what happens. Audrey goes for David. They stop her. She dies. Mary gets taken. End of reading.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, there's just like, it's so funny how some weeks we've talked about like the plot moves like 30, 40, 50 different things happen over the course of these pages. And this one, it's just like, just a few things happen. It's all very important and interesting, but yeah, just the book didn't move too much this week.
It's like the things that happened were very complex, and King went into a lot of detail. It's one thing I noticed a lot this week is, we'll talk about this when we get there, but I guess up front I'll just say, his style of writing action is usually fairly terse. I'm thinking of a lot of scenes in the Dark Tower where the build up to the action takes forever, and then the actual gunfight or whatever it is over in a page. In this case, though, we get just so much detail of these, conflicts that happen, and I just think it's really unusual for King, and just really interesting. So maybe we'll revisit that when we get to that part.
No, I like that. I look forward to that conversation. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like a good couple of chapters. There's a lot of interesting stuff, especially in the latter half of chapter 5, with David and his ongoing quest for godliness that we can. I am struggling, and we'll talk about this again when we get there, but I am struggling with like being able to talk about some of this specific faith quote God is cruel stuff, with where we are in the book right now. So I might like allow you to lead those portions of the conversation more than normally, because like it's just tough to talk about without the full scope of the story in mind. Like, I think I literally asked the question, like, is this what King wants us to believe the book believes or not? And we just don't know yet.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that makes sense. That's the value of having the Matt in this situation, is that I can just sort of react and tell you what I'm thinking. And I think that's an interesting way of talking about these things.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into it. Before we do that, though, just one quick announcement. Our first book club of the year. Technically, this is still December's book club. It's just a week late. So I guess it's not technically our first book club of the year, but it's happening in 2024, so we'll call it that. We're going to be meeting this Friday on the 5th of January at 9:30 p.m. Central Time over on our YouTube account to chat about this month's book, which is Star Wars Heir. I looked it up right before, and Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire.
Heir to the Empire.
And who is the heir to the Empire? It's a mystery.
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't finished the book yet, so maybe it'll tell me by the end.
It's funny, how well known is this book? Because I feel like everybody knows this book, but that's because I read it when I was like 11. Mm-hmm. And when you read something when you're 11, you're like, oh, this is part of the world. And it's one of the first batch of like Star Wars books that came out. One of the more formative EU books. So if you read this book a million years ago, back when it came out, come by and hang out with us while we talk about it this Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. It's gonna be fun for sure. I think we're gonna use this as a once again a excuse to talk about our larger feelings on Star Wars and what it was and is and will be.
Yes. Yes.
We also have our new series starting next week, I believe. Is that accurate, Matt?
Well, it should be. Yep.
Oh, we gotta get on that.
Uh-huh.
We're going to be taking a look at the series on Hulu, Castle Rock. This is the anthology Stephen King series. It's not a direct adaptation of anything. It's more like inspired by the town of Castle Rock from Stephen King series. We're going to be looking at the first 2 episodes of that show this month, and we'll be doing 2 episodes every month until we finish with the series. So that's the new thing we're doing over on our Patreon account this year. So if you want to be part of that, make sure you head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia and you can join in with the fun. I think we're calling it Castle Talk, Matt. That was a recommendation from a listener. I couldn't come up with anything better. It works pretty well. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
what we're gonna
great.
call it.
I love it.
So that'll begin next week. That episode should drop Wednesday of next week. So if you want to follow along with us, get those 2 episodes watched. You too, Matt. You have to watch those episodes.
Okay.
Not me.
Oh.
No, I definitely still do.
Okay.
I haven't watched them at all. Okay. All right, let's get into Desperation, and we begin chapter 4. We pick up this week, Matt, with Tack inside the body of Ellen Carver, ominously staring at the movie theater from the top of the steps of the municipal building. Well, not literally staring, because Tack can't actually see the building, but he can sense what's going on inside. And through that sense, we learn that while both David and Audrey have disappeared, our prayboy hasn't actually been captured yet. So we left kind of like on a cliffhanger last week where we didn't know. Like I think the assumption we both left with last week is that, not only had they disappeared, but that Audrey had David and had already captured him, and who knows what was going to happen from there. But no, not yet.
That was certainly my assumption. Kind of a great surprise to learn that no, he was just warned off by, God at the last second, and was not even aware that he was being hunted by Audra, right? Yeah. And I love this section. No, it is Audrey.
I thought about correcting you, but I was going to let it go. And then
God damn it.
You did
Whatever. Good old
Audrey.
Aud is what I call her. It's what I've always called her. Short for Audrey. So I love that. So, one thing I've enjoyed about this book in the beginning was like Entrigan, this giant cop. He's this weird guy. He's sort of unknowable. He's this wonderful antagonist. He's scary. Part of the fear is that he's unknowable. And we've transitioned actually entirely away from Entrigan even being a thing. It's now totally different person. And the unknowability element has also gone away, where now we're just in the head of Tack, and we're perceiving things the way Tack perceives them. And normally when that happens, when the veil of obscurity is pulled away, I kind of feel disappointed. This time I really don't, because I love how alien and like obviously inhuman Tack is on the inside. I love the description of like perceiving things through the animals and through through the bats, where it's like it could see through the bats' echoes, and like some amazing description of that. And just overall, I'm like, oh, this is one of those rare times where you finally see into the antagonist's head, and it's not actually disappointing. So that made me very happy.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think King manages to pull this off pretty consistently. As you were talking about that, the thing that I was thinking about was Pennywise, and the times at the end of that book that we get to actually sit inside its head, and that is, I think, equally not disappointing. I agree. Yeah, it's just I think he does. It is really interesting that he does such a good job of writing these completely alien presences that still feel real. I never like Tack. Being inside the mind of Tack is incredibly unique and weird and wonderful, and disturbing, while feeling different and distinct from just a normal human evil head.
Yeah, I agree. Yep.
So interesting that that the Tack calls Audrey his emissary. Which I mean that's kind of the big question that was kind of hanging over the reveal last week, which is like, what is Audrey?
Mhm.
Is she Tack 2.0? Is she just another being? And we learn quite a bit about this week. It's not quite the same, but not different.
Yeah.
It's similar in some ways, completely different in other ways from what Entrigan / Ellie Carver / Tack is.
Definitely not as simple as I kind of wanted it to be, where I was like, "Oh, it's Legion," and we're playing along with the idea that it's Legion,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
Legion is many, meaning that this being can divide into multiple bodies, and like I was actually literally expecting that we were going to find out that Tack, well, we didn't know its name was Tack at the time, I guess, but that this being Tack could like divide itself between multiple hosts, and that I was even open to the possibility that Entrigan, like the shambling Entrigan was going to come back, and it was going to be like it is just spreading itself through multiple people. It's not just
hmm
it's not just transferring between people. Turned out that wasn't quite right. It's more, I mean, I guess the way I'm reading the situation now is just that Audrey's got the little statues in her pocket. We don't know that yet. It takes us a bit, but we eventually figure out it's just she's got the statues in her pocket, and we saw that the statues have an incredibly powerful effect. And if you're just like holding them, I
yeah.
imagine that effect would just be persistent and overwhelming. And so that's what's going on with Audrey, which is different, obviously, from what's happening with Tack, where it seems like Tack is like its own um, non-physical, or incorporeal is the word I was reaching for, incorporeal force that it puts itself into people.
Yeah,
um, maybe
yeah.
there's maybe they're more similar than I'm thinking right now, but that's where I'm at right now.
I think that is kind of what the book has told us at this point. Sure. So I think you're spot on there. Yeah. That Audrey is basically, we're told what happens when you have prolonged exposure to these things that we
Mhm.
know that both Steve and Cynthia have already interacted with. This is what happens. And it is interesting the ways in which it is similar in that the growing larger thing that this the human body seemingly cannot contain this power for very long.
Yeah, that's true. That is one similarity for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do really like this here. The same, he's Tack is sitting there thinking about David, of course, and he's saying, why is he even here? Someone like him. Is it an accident, or was he sent? Why are you here? Are you an accident? Were you sent? Such questions were useless. It knew its purpose. Tack Allah, and that was enough. I love the use of purpose here, because I mean this is an echo that we're going to see repeated again at the end of the chapter with David, kind of being told or admitting to what his purpose in life is. I think we're setting up some interesting thing. Like the thing that I'm paying most attention to in this reread of this book are the ways in which the beats of Tack and God are being doubled here, and like the emissaries of God versus the emissaries of Tack. We have the Christian God, and then we have these other gods, and the ways in which those are being compared and contrasted with each other, I think, are really interesting. And so the idea of purpose here, what is your purpose? What is Tack's purpose in the world? Why was it created or exists or whatever? Being kind of drawn in direct contradiction and comparison to the God's purpose for all of us.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I was also thinking a lot about the idea of the purpose and the random, being the sort of ultimate names of these two great forces in King's cosmology.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Where I mean, I don't quite remember the exact details of it. I don't know if it's quite as simple as Gan and the White are identified with purpose, and Discord and the Crimson King and so forth are identified with chaos. I mean, it's I think it's intentionally a little muddy.
mm-hmm.
But I definitely was thinking here about the idea that like Tack definitely feels like one of these agents of the random, where Tack can't really plan, sort of incapable of forethought, sort of lives in the moment. Um, Reminds me a lot of the various creatures of the random, who are ultimately self-destructive, short-sighted, The man in the dream that David talks to later on will basically say as much, actually,
Yeah,
about Tack. Um, and
definitely. Yeah.
but I, all that being said, I do think it's so interesting what you pointed out here, which is that Tack says that Tack has a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It knew its purpose. And it's like, well, I guess it's. Am I supposed to know what Takala means, by the way? Because I don't. I mean, I know what Tack means. Tack is his name.
Yes. No. I don't think you need to. I believe that technically we've had it's tough to keep track of. Like sometimes they'll say some of these words of the dead, and then they'll say a sentence after it, and it's like, okay, did you just translate that? Is that a translation of what was just said there? And that happens multiple times throughout these chapters as well. And we don't know. I think if you walk away from this book not having any like literal understanding of this made up language, I think you're fine.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, I guess if you want to look up like what takala means, you can do that, and I don't think that would spoil anything for you.
Well, I'm zooming in on that because he says it knew its purpose, takala, and it's like, well, okay, implicitly its purpose is whatever that means. And in this moment where we're talking, I wish I could be a little bit more literal about what it thinks its purpose is. But instead I have to interpret midworld speech. So
yeah, I mean, it is interesting that we know. I think the things we learned this week are that can-tah is little god, can-tah is big god, right?
Yeah,
We learned some of these very specific things, but it feels like things like takala are just a little bit more nebulous there. Well, and I mean, I think that is perhaps one of the unanswered questions is we don't Tack says he has a purpose and he knows his purpose. We don't actually know what is Tack's end game, because we learn God's end game in this week's reading, right? Like he wants this thing is an affront to God and he wants it wiped off the face of the planet. But what does Tack want actually? Because I think you're onto something with the idea of discord and the idea of chaos and the idea of one of the things we've seen from Tack is this idea that of ultimate pessimism, ultimate cynicism, ultimate there is nothing. There's no reason to hope, to believe. Unbelief, right? I think is the word that's used by Mr. Yankee Cap at the end of the reading. And that seems to be his overall thing is the idea of unbelief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Sure. I think so. I mean, trying to undermine and destroy everything that is good and leading to
Mm-hmm.
belief in some goodness, right? Not just belief, floating belief as an idea, but belief in the possible goodness of the universe.
Yeah. I just want to say that part of what I was doing during that whole thing was
desperately
looking up what takala meant.
Yeah,
and I couldn't find it.
I was totally listening to you while doing the same thing. So, I mean, what I did find is I found a list of all the times that he says takala, which is several times. And the fact of the matter is that it is not what you would call a consistent usage.
Yeah.
Apparently, Entrigan tells the coyote to leave by saying takala. He tells the vulture to attack Johnny by saying takala. Calls the Ellen calls the spiders by saying takala, and then Tack's purpose is described as takala. So, if there's a through line, if we want to assume that there's an intentionality behind this, then it's kind of like imposing his will upon the world and giving orders, of various kinds, and it's like Tack imposes its will upon the world in the abstract.
Sure. I think that works.
Okay.
A linguist, Stephen King is not, right? He did not fully develop this language. He's not playing Tolkien here. We can even play with context clues and be like, well, if can-tah is little god and can-tah is big god, then Tack means big.
Uh-huh.
So Takala is big, big.
Big happen. I
Yeah,
mean,
big make happen.
so the fun stretch that I can do here is that he's basically saying I am, but he's
Yeah,
saying it in the speech of the dead.
sure. No, I like that. I like that. I am that I. Yeah, no, I actually like that interpretation a lot. That's great.
Yeah, he is what he is. There you go. That
Mhm.
we're going with it.
The other little section here I wanted to call out is this. It closed its Ellen eyes, focusing inward at first, but only for a second. It was unpleasant. This body had already begun to fail. It wasn't a matter of decay so much as intensity. The force inside it, can-tah, heart of the unformed, was literally pounding it to pieces, and its replacements had escaped the pantry. Speaking of translation of phrases there, right? That's can-tah, heart of the unformed. We are
Uh-huh.
led to believe that means. But I really like this though, because like I like that we're kind of told explicitly this is not a matter of just like, oh, this evil decays the body, like you get this evil in you and it just completely decays you. It's not that. It's just like a power that is granted by these type of gods is inherently destructive. It cannot be held, cannot be contained. It grows, it stretches you, and eventually rips you to pieces. Like I think that's, again, playing this game of comparing this to the emissaries of capital G God, and what that does to people. Like it is really interesting. It does, like, that power does not warp David, change him, empty him, like smush him. It does none of those things to David, and I think that's another intentional contrast we're doing here.
Yeah, and I believe there are many instances of the white just healing people throughout these books too.
Mm-hmm.
I love the language there. I love the evocativeness of heart of the unformed. I love so much of the description there. It causes you to like imagine this roiling chaos, this primordial chaos, and like frankly, you imagine all sorts of things that aren't actually being described. It
Mm-hmm.
just that's that's what I mean when I say evocative. It's like it causes you to imagine things beyond what's on the page, and to me, that's always the most fun descriptive writing. Anyway, is where it suggests things without saying them, and then you fill it in with your own imagination. Yeah, just really really good really good stuff. I love a lot of the otherworldliness and a lot of the descriptive writing in this book in general.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think the thing that I like so much about it here, and the way this is described, is just this idea of, and I think this is a drum we're going to hit a lot throughout this week's reading, the concept that we've talked about so much with King of evil and its nature to destroy itself, and kind of one of the things that this is inherently saying, and we get this confirmed at the end of the chapter, is that like this evil cannot survive in our world very long. It eats it eats itself. It destroys itself. Like just the force inside it, the heart of the unformed, when it tries to form in something, it rips that thing apart and cannot stay.
Yeah.
And it's just another way of reinforcing this general idea that that I think King has carried through so much of his stuff.
Yeah. One kind of cool thing about it is it's almost like it's too much life. You know, it's like this explosion of life that's tearing the body apart. It's not like they're turning into zombies in the sense of like it kills them and then it's just kind of shambling. It's this really creative and interesting sort of zombie where it's causing them to like burst and fall apart and be torn apart by the violence of its own like excess of life. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's some kind of like, you know, dark evil life, but it's still, it just has a very different feel to it than
Yeah.
than anything else that I've seen, frankly.
No, yeah, I agree. It's one of the really cool things about this book.
Yeah.
So Tack also sees that Mary is alone, still sitting with the dying Tom, and we see that it hatches a plan to get her as what he calls emergency rations, which I love that term so much.
Me too.
I just what a delightful evil character.
Yeah. Yeah, I love all that. I love the bit in Tack's perspective here. I did wonder what you thought though. Like, how do you think this upcoming bit from Mary's point of view would have played if we didn't know that the figure outside the window is indeed definitely Tack. Like, do you
Yeah,
think it would have been fun? Do you think it could have been fun if we had done it differently, where we don't know, or do you think it's better this way?
that's a good question. I think, I mean, there's like the difference between the suspense of the unknown versus the suspense of the known, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
the difference between there there being a bomb under the table that we know about or not, right? I like. I think it works. I think it works as we see it here. But yeah, I mean, there is part of me that wonders, like, wouldn't it be so much like the book has kind of never hidden Ellen Carver's identity from us the second she was taken over, right?
yeah,
And part of you wonders, like, there's a lot of choices here that you wonder, like, why King decided to go that way. There's something we're going to talk about in a little bit of, like, we can assume see the end of Ellen Carver in this week's reading. And like I think we talked about this the second that Tack took her over, which is like, this is a delicious chance for drama. We have two characters that are husband and son to that character that has now been taken over by an alien force. There's such an opportunity there to mine that for drama, of having Ellen Carver show up at that window and it's Ralph there or it's David there. And we just don't do that. Nope, we're not going to deal that. We're not going to do that. And that's
yeah.
interesting. And yeah, this is interesting too. Like this, using Ellen Carver and using this body switching thing as an attempt, not just to get one over on the characters that we see here, but also an attempt to get one over on the audience as well. Is another path not taken by King.
Yeah, and it's not like he uniformly tips his hand to us, because we just spent all this time with Audrey not realizing that Audrey was an
Yeah,
imposter.
yeah,
I mean,
that's so true. Yeah.
the typical King thing is to tip his hand. It
Yep.
is to relay the information, and then we have dramatic irony. It was
Hmm.
actually unusual that he withheld the Audrey reveal from us for so long.
Yeah.
And what he did here, where he reveals to us but not to the characters that Ellen is indeed a monster, that's a much more typical thing. I was just like, now I'm sort of thinking about it more, and I'm like, well, that definitely, like you say, definitely could have been done differently. Like, I can't help but imagine the scene where she comes to the window, and like you just said, it's her husband instead of Mary. And like, you can imagine him like desperately wanting to believe that it's his wife. And on some level, maybe even, we're in his point of view, and we see that he knows it's probably not, but he opens the door anyway.
Yeah.
Like, can't you imagine? Like I could just see that unfolding so well. So,
Yeah.
not that I'm not that I'm criticizing the way this goes down. It's just like, it's one of those it's one of those story moments where you're like, okay, like, why did he do it exactly this way instead of one of these other ways that I can also imagine going.
Yeah. Yeah. And he kind of repeats it again too with like, Tack has Mary, and presumably the next time we see Mary, she will be Tack. And so once again, we're not even trying to hide that fact either. So
Unless she gets away somehow. Yeah.
yeah, possible. Absolutely possible. Yeah. All right, so Tack chastises itself a bit for allowing Marinville to keep his phone, and we get this line that I wanted to talk about for a bit here. It says, at that point, its main goals had been to get the old fool jugged and replace Entrigian's body before it could fall apart completely. It had been sorry to lose Entrigian too. Entrigian had been strong. And I wanted to talk about Entragian with you for a bit here, Matt, because like I did see some discussion in one Reddit thread or another. Again, sorry, I'm going to fail to attribute this to a person because I failed to do my homework and look up who said it. But one argument I saw from someone is that one of the flaws of this book, and the reason that some people don't like it as well, is because Entragian is such a compelling character in the early parts of this novel. Like we talked about the first week, even the second week, like this guy just like immediately throws us into the book, and we're like, this is fascinating. I am so on board for whatever is happening here. And then King very quickly goes away from him. Entragian, the body itself is dismantled and destroyed, and arguably we didn't lose him as a character because Tack is still alive and well inside Ellen Carver. But I think what is absolutely true here is that we lose the best parts of this character, this kind of unhinged, insane way he interacts with the rest of our characters. I do think we get to see this a bit again when Ellen grabs Mary at the end of this chapter, but really that's it for like Tack / Entragian interaction with our cast. And I'm just curious what you think about that, because like, yeah, I mean, like I could totally see the argument that like this guy needs to be around them longer and needs to be interacting with them more frequently, because he is one of the most compelling bits of the story. What do you think?
Well, I definitely agree with that specific sentiment that Intrigian is one of the most fun and compelling parts of the story. You know, I may be over interpreting the fact that we see Audrey, sort of still alive inside of the new, tackified version of Audrey,
Hmm.
and we sort of see elements of Ellen inside of Ellen Tack, and by implication, some of Intragian's personality, and by that I mean the real Intragian, the man,
Hmm.
some of his personality must have been leaking through this demon corrupted version of Intragian, and some of the goofiness, some of the sense of humor, um, feels like it's not, like you said, it feels absent from this version of the character,
Hmm.
and it makes you think like, well, that must have been him. Like if it had been anyone other than this man in Trajan, would he have said, you're an organ donor? Do you think that's wise? like is that an Intragian classic, or is that something that Tack would have said no matter what body he was inhabiting,
Yeah.
and I have like very little basis to say this, but part of me feels like that's just an Intragian thing,
Yeah, maybe.
because he behaves a little bit differently than his, and we just haven't seen that much of him. Is the other thing. So I'll reserve judgment. Maybe this version will start being being a goofball and dancing around like the other one was. Um, I also think that there's something just intrinsically scary about him being a gigantic man who is also a cop.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's intimidating in a way that this instantiation is not so much. Um, so anyway, long story short, like, yeah, super compelling villain, and then it sort of turns into a different villain effectively.
Hmm.
The thing is, I'm still enjoying the hell out of this book, so I'm not about to say like, oh, and that's when the book became bad. It's like, well, no, I've been enjoying the book all the way through, honestly, um,
Yeah.
quite a
I,
lot. So,
totally. I agree. I think I was just I'm perpetually like trying to understand why this is not one of his more fondly remembered books by others, and sometimes myself, frankly.
mhm.
And I think like that is when I saw someone said that, I was like, yeah, yeah. And then like I was reading this week's reading, and I saw like it had been sorry to lose Intragian, and I was like, me too, book, like
Yeah,
me too. And there is like we get the moment with Mary and Ellie at the end of this chapter where she's singing Peter, Paul, and Mary to her as she grabs her. And that's like, oh, that's like vintage and Trajan stuff that I really loved. And I was so happy to see that back. But it just like, yeah, whether that's in Trajan or whether that's Tack or whether it's both or whether like, we don't know, but that stuff is few and far between after the killer opening section of this book. And that, I mean, if we're going to call it a critique, like this one, I just wish we had a little bit more of that. And we kind of set that up and then immediately moved away from it for a long time.
yeah. I also feel like if we had overdone it, it would have lost some of its potency. So, you
Probably
know,
true. Yeah.
there's always a middle ground, and one could argue that there could have been more, and there probably could have been more, but you know, it is what it
Hmm.
is. I like Intragian being this terrifying wrecking ball of a character who kind of you want to leave him wanting more, right? That's one of the
Yeah.
lessons in
No,
show
that's fair.
business. So,
That's fair. So from here, though, we cut over to Audrey Wyler, and we sit in her head for a little bit, and we get to learn a little bit more about what's happening to her. We talked about this a bit already, but we have this paragraph here where it says, "To the cougar, the voice of the thing from the earth had been like a fishhook. In Audrey Wyler's mind, it was like an acid-coated snake winding its way into her, melting the personality of the woman who had been here before it, even as it enfolded her. This melting sensation was extremely pleasant, like eating some sweet, soft food. It hadn't been at first. At first, it had been dismaying, like being overwhelmed by a fever. But as she collected more of the can-tahs, like a child participating in a scavenger hunt, that feeling had passed." So that's Audrey, Matt. So we already talked about collecting the things, and it's melting her personality away. By the way, the language used here, I don't, probably not an accident, but very similar to the ways in which Audrey described how they're leaching the metals out of the earth.
mhm.
Um, that feels intentional, right?
Oh, sure, sure. I mean, I didn't actually pick up on exactly that, but I was thinking a lot about the fact that Audrey is a geologist,
Hmm.
and everything is intentional, right? So
Yeah.
King has this is a character who is curious about the earth, who's dedicated her life to the earth in a sense, and is curious about what's under the earth, and she knows everything there is to know about what's under the earth, and then ironically, of course, she digs too greedily and too deep, and um, and is now possessed by this thing that is of the earth, this thing
Yeah.
that is from underground. I think that's great, and it really connects this character to the mine and the earth, and the idea that Tack is a thing of the earth.
Hmm.
Because I think otherwise that might be kind of easy to forget. It might be easy to just be like, yeah, Tack's just a demon. It's like, no, Tack's like this very specific demon that came from the earth, and it's tied into this mine atrocity that was committed. And yeah, I love that. I love all that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good stuff. I totally agree. The geology, like, who else is gonna spend so much time with rocks, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think it's the importance of it being part of the earth. I'm glad you're picking up on that, and I'm glad you said it here, because I do think that matters. And Audrey seems like the perfect vessel, for lack of a better term, of reminding us of that.
Yeah, and it's like this wound, right? It's compared later. It's like this wound in the earth, and um, yeah, I think we'll have a lot to say about that as we kind of move into the talking about the mine section of things.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. We'll circle back around to that again. I did want to point out here, though, that this is not the first time we've seen the word can-tah used in the Stephen King universe, right, Matt?
Yeah,
I don't know if you remembered this offhand, but the scold pada, the little scrimshaw turtle that the Katet found inside that bowling bag in the vacant lot on Keystone Earth, the one that Father Callahan successfully used to hold back the hordes of vampires and Cantoi and all that stuff, that was in that book called the can-tah as well. And just to remind you and everyone else of the timeline here, those books came out in the early 2000s. This book came out in 96. So although we experienced it with the turtle first, that is technically after this in the making. So
that's pretty cool. What's funny is I remembered a lot of words that sounded basically like can-tah coming out of the mouths of the Manny. And I was like, maybe this is one of those things the Manny was talking about. But yeah, very cool that it was one of the that it was a scrimshaw turtle. I think it's interesting though, because it's like once again, I think uh, the way these languages work is confusing, right? Because it's like, are we meant to? Does that mean we're meant to think of the scrimshaw turtle as a little god? Like, because I just saw the scrimshaw turtle as a kind of totem of Maturin,
mhm.
not more like a relic, or just like a symbol, than like a a being. Certainly that there didn't seem to be much about it that struck me as having its own intelligence, and I think that's fine. Like, I think it's actually really interesting, the idea that the can-tah of the evil side, they're these little monster demon Pokemon that take over your personality, and the good can-tahs are basically just sort of neutral items that amplify your innate goodness, you could say, speaking very broadly. I like that they're kind of different from each other, is my point.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I mean, the the word usage here is so confusing and non-specific that, like, I don't I ultimately I would say, does it matter? Is this an independent entity, or is it just a totem? Like, are these things totems to talk in the same way that
Mhm.
the turtle was a totem to matter? And I don't know, right? I don't
True.
know. Probably doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Actually, no, I think what I just said was probably confusing, because I made it sound like I thought these things had their own intelligence, and it's not really true either.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's more like they seem to have their own, I don't know, corrupting force that's intrinsic to them,
yeah.
whereas the turtle was just kind of a thing that honestly, in that book, I was always left with the impression that maybe Callahan didn't even need the turtle.
I mean, that certainly would line up with his whole journey with the power of totems.
Mhm.
uh like that was his origin story in the Dark Tower universe, is his inability to put faith in this totem of Christianity, which is the cross,
Mhm.
um kind of coming full to with the scrimshaw turtle. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we can absolutely say is that King is often inconsistent with this stuff. Like, when I read this book, can-tah were just evil little statues, and
Uh-huh.
then you read Dark Tower, and it's like, oh, this is one too, but no, this is a good one.
Yeah.
This is the good guy's version of this. Well, that's kind of confusing. Like, did he change his mind, or like, or he just expanded upon stuff in the way he does, which is like, whatever.
Yeah.
This is now part of the universe as well. Deal with it.
Sure. I mean, I kind of like the idea that a language can just be sort of sloppy like this. Like, again, if we're taking it at face value, it's like our language has all kinds of, homonyms and weirdness and idiosyncrasy where, sure, fine, maybe sometimes one word refers to several different contradictory things. There's no rule against that in language. Um, Whatever, I accept it. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, this is like the type of thing that I think drives some people crazy. It is the non-specificity of it, but I just don't care about it all. It's
Yep.
just fun.
Yep.
So through Audrey, we get to confirm what we kind of already knew through Tack, which is that David has disappeared before Audrey could grab him, and now she's currently searching through the theater. She's up on the second floor, looking around, trying to find him. This part of the theater is not so well maintained as the bottom part. We learn there are used condoms, broken glass. The balcony section is on the verge of collapsing. There's graffiti on the walls. This is not the beautiful, well maintained church of the first floor. And I wanted to point this out as well. One of these, as primitive as any cave drawing, showed a horned and misshapen child hanging from a giant breast. Beneath it was scrawled a little couplet: "Little bitty baby Smitty, I seen you bite your mama's titty." So Matt, my Google search history now has that phrase in it. Because I was like, surely King didn't just make this up whole cloth. It's just a very specific thing.
Uh-huh.
But no, this is just the mind of good old Steve.
Uh-huh. It's beautiful. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, I love how different and sort of gross and horrible the upper level of this theater is. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I thought about this a while, because we compared their first floor to a church a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
Like, this is Tom's kind of holy place, a place in which he puts great pride, keeping it maintained. Bringing the bar in, the artwork on the walls, and then we have this other place on top of it that is kind of built on the bones of that other place, that is the exact opposite of that. Not well maintained, falling apart, treated badly. And I do think there's something there.
Yeah.
This idea and I tried to think about this a while and really get complex with it, but like, the idea that, like, uh, there's a foundation of goodness, possibly, but built on that foundation is this horribleness. And like, I don't know, I tried to get like really fourth dimensional chess and be like, maybe this is King's commentary on organized religion in general, is that it's like, this has this really interesting, solid, uh possible good foundation, but corruption and misuse and terribleness are built on top of it, to the point where the whole thing is ready to collapse. I don't, that might be reaching too far, but
Well, I gotta say I love all that, although I didn't think of any of this, and I think I was taking it much more simplistically as as a sort of visual inversion of the idea of heaven and hell, where below them is this well maintained, beautiful sort of refuge, and
mhm,
then above is actually this perverse place of sexual, debauchery and weirdness. And I didn't really make much of the fact that it was inverted, other than that. That's just kind of an interesting way of thinking about things.
mhm,
Um, I don't know. I mean, like I did think there might be something along the lines of like, where are they heading? They're heading to the projection booth,
mm,
and it's like,
mhm,
okay, well, like that's certainly got some metaphorical potential. You've got like Socrates and or no Plato's cave, in the sense of like projecting images for other people to see that are actually illusory. Um, but there's some intrinsic reality, and that's where the showdown happens, is in this projection room. And it's like, does that mean that this is the real crux of things, and everything outside is just a shadow? I don't know. That feels like a stretch too. I do feel like there's something going on here. Like, I think
Yeah.
I think something along the lines of what we're gesturing at is intended. I just don't have a lot of confidence in what exactly it is.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's definitely true that if you know a movie theater is a church, then the production booth is the pulpit, right? Like
Mhm.
that is where the word of God is coming from,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
being projected out to the masses. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting
And
stuff
yeah.
though. I love the imagery though.
I mean, it's being projected out, and it's like explicitly like an illusion. It's like false, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's whereas, like you said, down at the bottom, down on the first level, is where the people are just going about their lives, trying to build something beautiful, trying to get through the day.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I think that's really, um, I definitely, there was like intentionality behind making it a theater, and I think some of these metaphors are there. I'm just not sure exactly what to make of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, think about this more.
Yeah.
I think revisiting this will be good for us.
Okay.
So Audrey decides that David must be in that projectionist booth, and before she does that, she yanks down a blow up doll and tosses it angrily out onto the balcony. This is, I think, one of those moments that's definitely worth taking a closer look at, because it is Audrey's choice here that inadvertently alerts Cynthia and therefore the rest of the group to her presence, to what's going on up there, that leads them all up there, and thus ends up saving David's life. So why is Audrey doing this? Right? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Like, why does she get mad at a blow up doll and chuck it out onto a balcony that exposes where she is? Well, in the moment, what is happening is that the parts of her that are left, that haven't been fully eaten away by the rainbirds of the Tack Mining Corporation, those remaining parts are wrestling with the evil parts. And I love this line here. You are going to become the most highly paid woman geologist in the country. Own your own consulting firm by the time you were 35. Maybe win a Nobel Prize by the time you were 50. Weren't those the dreams? And so then from there, the sex doll becomes kind of the focus of doubt within her, where she's like, no, but weren't isn't that what you wanted? And it's like, no, that I'm strong, Tack is strong, and therefore I'm going to prove that by destroying this plastic blow up doll.
Yeah. I mean, classic, evil destroys itself. And also, I mean, you could view it as, this is like one of the last gestures that Audrey is able to make, is, betraying her presence, right? Not that she necessarily does this with full awareness of what she's doing, but I think you're saying, her conflict with herself is what leads to this sort of crack in her composure, which then reveals where she is to everyone else.
But just the most classic possible example of the way in which evil fucks itself over, right?
Yeah.
That like it has to, in order to justify itself, it has to make this point to punish this blow up sex doll, and in doing so, it fucks itself over.
Yeah. I just want to comment here that no geologist has ever won the Nobel Prize, and indeed there is no Nobel in geology. So,
well, there should be, Matt.
I feel like Audrey may have had her sights set a little too high, maybe a little too ambitious.
There should be.
Yeah,
why isn't there?
I don't know. I don't know why there's no Nobel in geology. I think
so. Do we think this is, do we want to play the author's a genius and everything's intentional, or do we want to play that like Stephen King definitely just didn't know that the odds of a geologist getting a Nobel are slim to none?
Oh, I mean, the way the way I was kind of just joking around here. I mean, I like the way I think about it is like there's no law saying a geologist can't win a Nobel Prize. It's just like the thing that you would have to discover to win a Nobel Prize is generally something like incredibly revolutionary, and there's just like not that much stuff you're going to discover in the field of geology it's going to be that world shattering.
Would you win a Nobel Prize for discovering a rock that makes people want to have sex when you touch it?
Ironically, probably. I mean, if it's like you discovered magic, you discovered literal magic. So
yeah.
Congratulations, Audrey. You discovered possibly the only thing that could lead to a Nobel Prize for a geologist.
Yeah, so stop complaining, Tack Audrey. You're golden.
Yeah, yeah. Too bad she's not gonna, get to go to the ceremony, but good for her.
Yeah. So Audrey heads to the projector booth, and the book cuts over to David at this point, who is indeed hiding inside there, or actually, as we learn, not hiding. David didn't leave because he was fleeing Audrey. He didn't get a sign from God that Audrey's going to come after you. Run away, David. He just suddenly got the very strong urge to go pray. And he was taught that praying was for your closet and not in the street. So he searches for the only private place in this theater, which is the projection booth, and that's where he goes to go pray, which is again just a really interesting choice. This whole thing really interesting, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's so perplexing how it all unfolds, because you're like, okay, cool. Like, obviously God, Gan the White, has him covered here. He's gonna go hide somewhere. He's not even aware that he's hiding from Audrey, but he's gonna hide successfully, and then he's gonna get out of the situation. And then like, as it plays out, you're like, wait a second. Oh shit. Audrey knows exactly where he is, and she's just gonna come upon him while he's comatose. Wouldn't it have been better if he just stuck with everybody else? And I think that's like a perfect instance of this thing he's doing with this book over and over, where you're like, hold on a second, this God character doesn't really seem to have everything in order. Like, this doesn't seem to be working out. But then of course in the end it does. It just goes in kind of a roundabout way, because as we're going to see in just a second, everybody shows up in time.
Yeah. But also, like, what God does for David here is make him go unconscious.
Yeah.
And like, why? What, that really? That's like, in desperation you turn to God for help, and God's like, all right, I got you. Pass out.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the best I can do is that he really needs to have this conversation that he's about to have. Like that's the most important thing. It's more important than anything else, is he needs to be, essentially spiritually prepared for what's about to happen by having this conversation, which means he needs to be knocked out and whisked away to dreamland.
It would be such a God in this novel choice to be like, I'm not going to prevent you from being almost choked to death. I'm going to position things so people will definitely be there to prevent your death, but you're going to go through all that still, because, well, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're still going to wake up all strangled, but you'll survive.
Yeah. One other thing I wanted to talk about here was we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that we hadn't seen doubt in David, really. We haven't seen it as a person that really was struggling with their faith and belief, and I think we get that here. Really importantly, it says here, as always at those times when he felt he really in need of God, the front of his mind was serene, but the deeper part, where faith did constant battle with doubt, was terrified that there would be no answer. The problem was simple enough. Even now, after all his reading and praying and instruction, even after what happened to his friend, he doubted God's existence. And I love this, because I think this is just invariably true for anyone who believes in anything, right? Like on some level, there is this constant battle in your brain between faith and doubt. There's this constant battle between, yes, I believe and I know and I'm confident in that, and also, but what if I'm wrong? And I just feel like it's inaccurate, even in the most kind of like David is an emissary of God in this book, basically. Like, we've compared him to Jesus, we've compared him to Moses, we've compared him to Noah, I think, and even those people still have doubt. Of course they do, because they're humans.
Yeah. I think that's what makes David relatable, right? And makes him because I think without that element, he is just sort of other. He's sort of beyond.
It does strike me as interesting that we kind of waited for so long to get this side of him, really. And I think that was a conscious choice of, we're really going to define David. We see him go through his story, and then the book moves out of his point of view for so long, and we just kind of see him do his miracles from an external perspective. And we see him as kind of this, like, I'm constantly thinking about Johnny's like reaction to everything he does, and it's like, wow, if this this kid's gonna make me get down on my knees and pray as well, like this outward appearance of absolute obedience, innocency, and faith, whereas inwards there's always this kind of roiling turmoil, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's true. I want to talk about Johnny in a minute, but yeah, just to totally agree with you here that um, both aspects of that I think are important. Actually, the conflict is important for us as the reader, but also the fact that he just seems perfectly calm and composed and sort of confident um, in the face of all of this horror is definitely having a huge impact on the people around him, which may actually
Yeah.
end up mattering quite a lot, right? Like he's not the only player in this situation. What
Hmm.
Johnny chooses to do in the finale, well, first of all, I don't know what the shape of that finale is going to be, but it's like it's got to matter. Like why else have all these characters, right?
Yeah.
So it's like what effect the kid has had upon Johnny is going to matter, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assumption for sure. So as we said, David prays, asks God for help, and then immediately falls unconscious. Aubrey makes her way into the production booth and now towards the completely defenseless and unconscious David. I really like this beat though, Matt, and it's a recurring beat we've seen of fear here. How both Tack and Audrey are afraid of David, and I love kind of the irony of the situation where she opens the door, sees David unconscious against the wall, the whites of his eyes showing, like he's not only unconscious, he's kind of like tranced out,
Mhm.
and she's terrified of him. Like he's completely defenseless, completely unable to do anything, and the first thing she feels is fear. And I know I brought this up because you've talked for a long time throughout many of these books about how so much of the evil done in King novels is primarily motivated by fear.
Mhm.
And then we have here another instance of these characters being driven by how afraid of this child they are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, in a minute, the person who talks to David in the dream is going to say that this is just this weak, pathetic thing, and I think it is. It is a weak thing. It likes to talk about how strong it is, but
Hmm.
it's very fragile, as we'll see. Like it loses its grip on the statues and it just disintegrates. So
Yeah.
it's it's it is rightfully afraid, but it's like in denial, and I think that's that's the kind of ground level stupidity of evil basically
Yeah.
is like this rejection of God, even while like kind of knowing that God exists. It's like, oh, okay, that's a bad move, like, wait a minute, God is real because you're a magical demon creature and you're going to choose to disagree, you're going to choose to fight against him. That sounds like a losing maneuver. That sounds like a very short timeline style strategy.
Hmm.
um but you do you, Tack.
From here, we cut back to Steve and Cynthia. She, as we mentioned already, catches a glimpse of a floating person in above the balcony, which leads to Steve once again, Matt, kind of having a sudden ominous feeling that he gets that drives him up the stairs. The rest of the group follows her, and they burst into the projection booth as David is being strangled to death by Audrey. She opens fire on Steve as he walks into the room. Fortunately, she misses because the projection booth is sunken, so he steps down a little bit, and the bullets go over his head. Um, and then we kind of just leave this scene where it's at. We pick up with it again later. We don't see
Mhm.
how this resolves quite yet.
Yeah, and it's going to be quite hectic when we get back to it.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But before we do that, Matt, we have to see the capture of Mary. So yeah, we join with Mary, and as we already said, we already know Tack is kind of planning to get her. Sees that she's been left alone with the dying Tom, and there's an opportunity there. Tom passes away, and Mary hears that voice of Ellen Carver, and I think this scene is absolutely fascinating because there's something going on here, right? Mary hears Ellen's voice and is almost immediately suspicious that there's something going on, that I shouldn't trust her. There's weird. Everything in my body is telling me, stay away, get the other people, don't do this, don't help her. But she ignores all of that in the name of, being good, being a good person. And that's a really interesting idea, because it is her quest and desire to be a good person that fucks her over here.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be a little bit too pat, a little bit too convenient if in King novels we could always rely on the evil to destroy itself, and we could always rely on the good to like perfectly win and preserve itself. And just like, oh yeah, well, of course, if you do the right thing, you'll be rewarded. It's like, no, we know that's not true, because King is not, he is writing in a fantasy world, but the reason he's writing about fantasy is to say something about reality, and in reality people do good things and they're not rewarded.
Yeah.
And here what we're seeing is somebody acting out of good intentions that are being taken advantage of by evil, which is being manipulative. And I mean, first of all, that's just real. That's the way the world is. And you could even view it as part of the like cruelty or at least indifference of God, where like she's doing something good and she doesn't get rewarded for it at all. Another thing I was thinking about is like, well, maybe you have to be a little hard to be a servant of the white.
Uh-huh.
Like I think it's fair to say that as complex as Roland as a character is, he is a servant of the white. He's a kind of tool of the white, actually. And the fact that he's willing to be so utterly ruthless is really something that the white finds quite handy. He's not a perfect tool. He's not a perfect avatar of the white, certainly. But the fact, I don't think Roland would have been taken in by this. I think Roland would have shot her in the face
Yep.
immediately.
Yep. I thank you for saying that. I agree 100%. I think you're absolutely on to in what my opinion is the lesson of this section.
Mhm.
Like, listen to this. And Mary Jackson, that sweet little princess, votes Democratic, gives blood every 2 months, writes poetry, had actually considered leaving her out there to moan in the dark until she could consult with the men. And what did that mean? That she had been in the same war, Mary supposed. This was how you thought, how you behaved when it happened to you. Except she wouldn't. Be damned if she wouldn't. So, first of all, the idea of labeling herself a good person, like votes Democratic. I vote for, I write poetry, I vote for a Democrat, and I donate blood. Ergo, I am unquestionably a good person.
Yeah.
Is in and of itself absurd, right? Like that's just not how that works. But I think there is something to the idea. One of the things that David is told in the next chapter is, why is God cruel? Well, and the thing he supposes is the idea that cruelty is refining, that the things we suffer and go through affect us and change us, and perhaps arguably equip us for the trials and tribulations of life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Mary having gone through a horrific event, and she doesn't learn from it. Like she not only does she not learn from it, she's actively resisting it. She's saying to herself everything that she needed to learn, which is that like the world is way scarier and way worse than you thought it was, that monsters exist, bad things are happening, and it has changed you, and your doubt and your instinctual mistrust of the situation is garnered from that experience, and you refuse to allow it. You refuse, be damned if she would, which again, very specific choice of words here. I think that's exactly what this is. And I think it's so interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. What's interesting to me is that Mary was kind of portrayed from the beginning as being the harder of certainly the harder of the two between her and her husband, and in some ways harder than these other characters that are around her. And so it's just so interesting to have it kind of at the last extremity, when her sympathies are really played upon in this specific way, she folds. And it's not out of a lack of willingness to fight that she is captured. It's out of her own sympathy, which in effect is a kind of weakness, which is a really interesting thing to say,
Mhm.
because we think of, empathy and sympathy and compassion as all being these like positive, holy, Christian traits. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, there's no rule that says that your Christian charity can't be exploited, obviously.
Yeah, and often is. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. It's sometimes exploited by the very church that you're worshiping at.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that is like like I want to live in a world in which the Mary Jacksons of the world are rewarded for being steadfast to their belief in what is the good right thing to do. That when a person is standing outside of a window crying and calling for help, you should just help them. You shouldn't even question it. Like I want to live in that world. We don't. We just don't. People take advantage of that stuff all the time, and
Hmm.
Mary learns that lesson the hardest possible way.
Yep.
Um, so also interesting to note here, like this is where I maybe wanted to revisit that conversation that we had earlier. Where like, how is this not Ralph or David that is here? Like, it just maybe that's why, right? Because it's so obvious. It's such the obvious place to go in this moment is that like Ellen is going to come in contact with Ralph and David, and they're going to have to deal with seeing their mother transformed into a horrible monster. Um, but we don't do that.
I mean, I guess like the Watsonian reason would be that God in the story is like, oh, can't let them run into her. That will be irrecoverable. The kid will freak out. I'll totally lose him. So I need to make him go into a coma so that he misses this whole part, and,
Uh-huh.
and he can kind of not have to see this, and then he can still keep being my good little servant, which is a really kind of cynical way of looking at the situation, but
Hmm.
kind of can't avoid the fact that God orchestrated this whole thing to get both David and his father away from this area so that they would be safe and not exposed to this. And now, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I like it because it's so cynical, honestly.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of cynical discussions of God in this thing, right? Like, this
mhm,
is definitely like the thing that's interesting about it to me is that like it is operating from a perspective of yes, God 100% exists, is a being that exists at least within the world of the story, but also doesn't he kind of suck sometimes, or at least like it feels like that to us here living on this planet with all these bad things happening to us, and it's like such an open, frank, earnest exploration of those ideas that
mhm,
like I'm going to present a situation in which God 100% exists. There's we actually, the reader, don't have to have any doubt about that because we are shown the miracles that David continually works. um but also, if that's true, if then what do we do with all this bad shit that's happening to these people?
yeah,
And let's try to work through that.
yeah, yeah. That I'm just once again really enjoying this book and enjoying that element of things.
Mhm, mhm. And as we already said, I just want Tack singing "Leaving on a Jet Plane" by Peter, Paul, and Mary is just the perfect way to end this chapter. It's horrifying, like horrifying, but like I laughed.
Yeah. Oh, it's wonderful. I love this
Yeah,
character.
yeah. All right, so we move on to our second chapter of the week, chapter 5. We begin this chapter with good old Johnny Marinville. Been a little bit since we got to hang out with this guy. He's up in the projector's booth witnessing the scene before him as everyone moves to save David from Audrey. Before we actually press play on those events, though, Matt King does a little diversion here and tells us about one of Johnny's gifts. That is the gift of memory. He never forgets anything, and even in his most drunk, substance abuse state, he remembers a horrible car crash that he went through, beat by beat, piece by piece. And not only does he remember it, but the writer in him like narrativizes it, where he
Hmm.
takes the events and is able to almost instantly construct them in a beat to beat, not even cause and effect, but then because type of train.
Yeah.
So we get to kind of see all like the reasoning behind this. King spends a few pages on this, right? We don't rush through this. Like he really wants us to understand that this is an intrinsic part of Johnny and who he is as a person. And I guess so. My question here for you is, why do you think we're doing that? We're spending so much time on this particular thing.
Well, I mean, I feel like in a previous week I compared Johnny to potentially being like an apostle,
Mm-hmm.
and this week I was thinking about John the Baptist because of the name comparison. Um, and I don't know that anything quite lines up one to one with John the Baptist actually, but I was thinking about John the Baptist. The point of all that is to say, like Johnny's role here is to be a witness to these miracles, and these horrible things happening also, like basically be one of these characters in the New Testament whose life is touched by holiness and magic basically, and then they become a changed man, they become a truly spiritual man. So Johnny's role is to be a witness of all of this, and his perfect memory, which is almost magic itself, it's almost a kind of version of the touch.
Mm-hmm.
It has been placed in this position so that he can be a witness. His memory and his abilities as a writer and his reach as a writer facilitate his ability to transmit what he has witnessed here accurately. So I don't know if you want to call that a prediction. I think that's going to be Johnny's role. Is he, whatever happens to everybody else, Johnny goes on and he becomes like a uh, apostle, one of the testaments of the New Testament, right?
Mm-hmm.
The testament of Johnny concerning David, um, the word of
I
the
like that.
Lord.
I like that so much. That's great. That's great. We do find here, though, Matt, that in this moment, Johnny is once again frozen, unable to move or help or do anything. But once again, he's motivated by an external source. This is not a woman, guilting him into it, but rather a man physically bumping him forward into a scene. He only moves forward because Ralph is kind of running into the projection booth, runs into Johnny, which pushes Johnny forward. This time, though, unlike with the cougar, he's doesn't really do anything here. He tries to grab for Audrey, misses, but she misses him as well. So, hooray!
Yeah, I mean, I'm really digging this interpretation that he's just he's sort of a natural observer. He was a journalist in the war. He wasn't a combatant. He was just a journalist. He just watches. He just witnesses. He writes things down. In some sense, this makes him feel worthless, but it's like, well, this is your purpose. Your purpose is not to act. Your purpose is to sometimes be in the way and then write things down and tell other people what you saw.
Yeah, I mean that was his experience in Vietnam as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So he, the struggle similar to the one with the cougar breaks out. Only there are no guns this time. Johnny, for his part, picks up the unconscious David, who we see has very deep finger marks in his neck. And this is the point where the Audrey thing breaks out, the can-tahs. And we see here he was suddenly consumed with hate for the boy in his arms and overwhelmed by a desire to put something, his motorcycle key would do nicely, into the interfering little prayboy's throat and open him like a can of beer. So no sex with these ones, Matt. Just violence. What's the difference in your mind? We talked about this a little bit already. With, are these things willful, or actual little gods, or what? But is it the statue themselves that broadcast the feelings, or is it just like what the people around the statues want them to convey? What do you think?
I mean, this is a sex type Pokemon, and the other ones were violence type. Sorry, this is a violence type Pokemon. The other ones were sex type Pokemons. No, I think I don't know. I mean, it could be intrinsic to the statue itself. It could be what is in that person's kind of heart in the moment. I can't help but think that Steve and Cynthia were, I honestly think I was just misreading the book in the beginning, because like in retrospect, considering kind of where we've gone with these characters, I'm like, yeah, they were probably kind of developing crushes early on, kind of subtly,
Yeah,
and
maybe. Yeah.
and the statue was just like, y'all wanted, y'all are interested in each other romantically. I'm gonna turn that dial up to 11, and you're gonna fuck until you die. And so that was just like the button that it pushed, because that kind of that hook was already there in them. And maybe that's just not there for Johnny, and so it goes with a different hook. I don't know. This is like the most conjecture ever. I really don't pretend to understand how the statues work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the counter argument to that would be like, did Johnny have any desire to hurt
No,
David?
right?
I mean, I guess
yeah.
you could say that, like, we have talked about Johnny's anger issues as a thing that he has, right? Like,
True.
it's been a thing that's like part of the definition of his character from the beginning was he's a person that has abused his past wives. So maybe it is just focusing the kind of boiling rage that is under the surface of Johnny. So I mean, I think that's the argument that would line up with what you're saying here, I think.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Yeah. So Steve manages to slap the stones out of Audrey's hand at the last moment, and they go flying into the corridor, and she almost immediately starts melting, collapsing. Her arm falls off, Matt.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Her arm, people's arms are falling off. This is really gruesome stuff here, actually, Matt. Like, the sloshing sound that she makes as she runs away is just, it's so gross.
Yeah, the arm flopping off is maybe the single grossest thing in any King book we've read.
Mm-hmm.
I like the idea that this starts to happen as soon as she loses contact with the can-tahs, because it's like they were just like barely holding her together. Mm-hmm. This was probably going to happen soon anyway, but now that their power is gone, she's just like a rotten piece of fruit. She just falls apart.
Yeah. We see here in this moment that the real Audrey returns briefly to apologize and warn them never to touch the can-tahs. And I love the part where both Steve and Cynthia are like, "Uh-oh."
Yeah.
I hope we're okay. I think the actual line is like, "Ooh, we just got very, very, very lucky," actually.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, it's great. I love how kind of chaotic and inept this battle is, though. I mean, I call it like it's barely even a battle. It's like a handful of people versus a woman who is physically disintegrating. But she has these little statues that are magic, and it's just, and people are like tripping and falling and bonking into each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not funny, but it's like almost funny. It's I heard Jordan Peele say that the difference between horror and comedy is the music. And that kind of, the scene reminded me of that.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, you're absolutely right that like nothing is smooth here. Like nobody looks cool in the sequence. It's just kind of people like sliding around and falling over and tripping, and all the while a woman is strangling a boy to death, and seemingly a group of 5 people can't seem to do much about it. Until they finally can.
The coolest thing anyone does is Steve slaps some little statues out of a woman's hand.
Yep. And that leads to the end of Audrey. She warns them, apologizes, and then jumps out onto the balcony, which you've already been warned about is ready to go. This causes it to collapse. It collapses on Audrey Wyler once and for all, and that's it. She's gone. So Matt, what was the Audrey character doing in this book? What was her purpose? Since we're talking about purpose so much.
Well, she's Gollum. I mean,
Here we go again.
Actually, she's not that much of a Gollum, really. But she is a pretty pitiable character, where she is a normal person who has the terrible misfortune of falling prey to a magical object, which then corrupts her, and then and then destroys her. It's not very Gollum-like, really, because she doesn't. That's not how it plays out. But it is. But what is her role, though? What is her role? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, actually. I'm not succeeding in finding out in my brain right now what is Audrey's role, like metaphysically, like, because we didn't know that much about her. I mean, we knew that she was a geologist. She was part of the mine operation. So you could say she bears some responsibility for what's happened here, and now she's punished for it. Punished, far in excess probably of what she actually did. It's like, okay, you damaged the desert a little bit, and now you're going to be killed in this horrible way. I don't know if that's quite
Yeah.
fair, but I don't know. Maybe King really likes desert ecosystems more than I realize.
Maybe. I mean, I maybe we'll put a pin in this because I do want to talk about her in relation to how people in David's dream interact with him, the people he sees there. I think that says something important. So
Yeah,
we'll hold
okay.
off on that for now.
Sure.
But with Audrey gone, they're finally able to pay attention to David, who we learn is still alive, but he seems to be comatose, maybe not comatose, but sleeping, dreaming, and we'll get into that dream here in a little bit. But first, Johnny and Steve go off looking for the now missing Mary. I do, Matt, I really do appreciate this part in the ongoing kind of Rubik's Cube that is Johnny Marinville. We see him get to the bathroom and basically Sherlock together what happened to Mary. In a fun kind of way that we use dramatic irony to know that he's absolutely 100% correct in everything he supposes here, which just like reinforced Johnny's ability to, as you said, observe. And this contradicts with his uselessness at other times. So like in the action, that uselessness, this is exactly what you've been talking about, is once again reinforced here.
Yeah, I mean, he's very useful as a witness. His perceptions, his mind are all razor sharp, almost supernaturally so. He's perfectly useless in any kind of physical situation. I shouldn't say perfectly useless. He did successfully distract the coyote with his jacket. So that's something. That's one instance of non-uselessness.
We got one.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think this is a valuable service here too, right? Because now at least, like, if they open the door to the theater and see Mary, they're not going to immediately be like, "Hey, it's Mary." Johnny's going to be like, "Oh, you're bad."
Yeah, true. It's not like this was too late. I mean, it was too late to save Mary, but it's not too late to make correct deductions.
Yeah. So they leave the bathroom, go back to the others, and they're deciding that they're going to move David. I think we see them. The plan is to get into Steve's truck and get the hell out of here, while David is sleeping. And we spend the rest of the chapter with David and his dream. So we see immediately that he's in his hometown, walking down the street, aware he's in the dream, but not really aware of what's happening, or why it's happening, rather. And one of the first things he sees is Reverend Martin, drunk on the side of the road, drunk and in really bad shape, throwing up. His eyes are empty-eyed, it says. Martin is talking to him, and he's quoting from the Bible. He's quoting from Genesis 41:15. This is a story about when Joseph is summoned to the Pharaoh to help him interpret his dreams. Basically, the Pharaoh had two dreams and didn't know what they meant, and he was asking all his advisors and everything, and no one could tell him what they meant. And someone said, "Hey, this Joseph guy, believes in this God. Ask him." And the quotes in the book here are basically Joseph saying like, "No, I that's not me. I can't tell you what your dreams mean. It's God speaking through me. God will do that." Worth noting, I think this might matter, and this is why I'm bringing it up. The actual story in the Bible that this is referencing, the dreams that are being referenced here, is the Pharaoh had two dreams. One of them was about 7 healthy cows on the side of the Nile. 7 gaunt, sickly cows show up and eat those 7 healthy cows. And then the second dream is having 7 fresh, healthy stalks of corn. 7 sickly stalks of corn show up and consume and destroy those healthy ones. And we're told by the story that the interpretation from Joseph via God is that Egypt is going to have 7 years of growth and prosperity, followed by 7 years of death and famine, and that the reason, by the way, this happens twice, Matt, is because God is like super serious about this. So he makes him have the dream 2 times, because like one time, 2 times, it's gonna really happen. I'm not fucking around. And that basically the Pharaoh should take these 7 years to save as much as possible to be able to survive the second set of the famine that's going to come in 7 years after that, which he does. He appoints Joseph to be basically his second in command, and Joseph goes out and sets up systems to ensure that they put away and save as much food as possible to survive those 7 years of famine.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the story of Daniel was also a story that was adjacent to dream interpretation, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
And we did have a whole interlude about uh, David being like Daniel in the lion's den when it came to the coyote. So I think this idea of interpreting dreams is recurring and therefore important, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and look, like from a practical sense, there's a lot of stories in the Bible that are just like, hey, people, here's some lessons on how to not die. which is exactly what the story is, right? It's like, hey, sometimes you're going to have a lot of food and sometimes you're not going to have a lot of food.
Uh-huh.
And what you should do is you should save that food.
Yeah.
This is essentially what the story is. But
right.
I mean, within the context of this, but on top of being a story about how like God is powerful and if you worship him, you will be rewarded with these, that you will know these things and like blah, 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 blah. Right. But yeah, I think you're right that within this is this idea of dreams, this idea of interpreting dreams, this idea of God speaking to you through visions and dreams and talking and being able to understand them and interpret them and act upon them, I think is very important here. There's also a line David has when he's going to the to the projection booth to pray, where he thinks back about what Reverend Martin told him, and is basically this idea of like you continually converse with God when things are going well, to kind of and then you cash that in, for lack of a better phrase, when things start to go bad for you. And I think this parable of the cows and the corn like mirrors that. I think it wasn't corn, by the way. It's probably wheat. I don't know if they had corn.
I don't think they did. I thought corn was specifically a New World thing.
Let's say wheat. Let's say food. It's food.
But didn't the Old Testament happen in South America? We learned from.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. That's true. That's true. That's true of many things, really.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I wonder. I can't help but wonder once again if this is yet more of the idea of like King kind of feels like these stories are channeled through him. And it's like he's a prophet of some kind, you could say.
Yeah, perhaps. This is not the only biblical passage that is referenced here, by the way. David sees Audrey, or specifically Audrey's head. And Audrey's head says to him, "There shall arise among you a prophet and a dreamer of dreams. But if he should say to you, 'Let us seek other gods,' you shall not hearken unto him." This is from Deuteronomy 13. And I think, as you pointed out already, once again, we have dreamer referenced here. By the way, this passage goes on to say that false prophet must be put to death for inciting a rebellion against the Lord your God. And that's just because the Old Testament was fucking metal as hell.
Very, very metal. Yes. A lot of this, perhaps I'm being, classically too clever and pulling a chocolate here, but I'm wondering if like the dreamer reference is actually David necessarily. Like, I guess I'm just thinking like maybe David in like purely cynical God is cruel fashion, like David's role is just to be this like pathetic sacrifice that then like awakens something within Johnny, and then Johnny is actually the prophet or something like that. Because I keep trying to figure out what we're doing with Johnny basically, and I'm like, that would be really mean. So I'd like it, and that would be appropriate.
That's fun. The thing that we put a pin in earlier that I wanted to point out here was like we have, David sees a bunch of people at this walk. He sees Audrey. He sees Martin. He sees Pi. He sees Entrigan, and he sees his mother. And some of these people talk to him kindly. The Reverend is offering him advice by quoting the Bible, right? Audrey is offering him advice by quoting the Bible. Pi is just kind of sad. Entrigan and his mother are both antagonistic to him. And I think that does show, like, Entrigan and his mother were both things that were possessed by Tack. Audrey was too, but perhaps the message here is Audrey broke free of that at the very end, and therefore in this land of the dead that we learn this is called later, she is represented as on the side of good, I guess. And so her interaction with David is like positive and helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I like that. I mean, I actually just kind of pretty straightforwardly agree with you. I think
Hmm.
I think that makes sense. Although you did kind of remind me, isn't it interesting that they call it the language of the dead, and
Yeah.
it's clearly just the high speech of Midworld. Like,
Well, not exactly. Like
I
this,
guess, yeah,
it's like the Cantoi, like what was the name? What was what they called um the Crimson King? It was like Abila, right? Like
yeah,
that is the same language as this.
I guess
Um,
maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe these are two different languages.
I think they are. Yeah.
It's kind of like dark speech and Elvish are not the same language. They're just two languages that exist inside Tolkien's world. Sure,
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So David confronts his mother. So we didn't get the confrontation in the real world that we thought, but we do get this confrontation in the world of the dead. His mother is obviously not really his mother. Even in this dead world, it's just Tack antagonizing him, and she's trying to get him to slow down. We haven't talked about it yet, but I love the recurring, like, the mummies chasing you beat that has continued to recur throughout this. I
Yeah.
just love it. I just love it. It's just like it's perfect. We talked about this when it was first said as like these sayings that King invents for these novels and then recurs them and recalls them to convey things throughout the book is just great, and we see it again here.
And it's really dreadful here because like he senses there is something pursuing him, but
Yeah.
he can't really see it. But he feels like there's something that's after him, and he needs to like finish this,
Yeah.
or it'll get him.
Mhm.
I love that.
And all the evil needs to do is just slow him down. They don't even need to turn him off of his course entirely. They just need to slow him down enough to do that. And that's like the concept of like faith versus doubt, or belief versus unbelief, I guess. That all you need to do is put a little bit of that doubt in there, and perhaps you win. Because that's what his mom's trying to do here. Um,
Yeah,
it,
you're right. Yeah,
like this idea is, yes, your God is strong, no argument there, but look what he's done to me. Is this strength worth admiring? Is this a God worth having? God didn't do that, David said, and began to cry. The policeman did it. But God let it happen, she countered, and one of her eyeballs dropped out of her head. The same God who let Entrigan push Kirsten down the stairs and then hang her body on a hook for you to find. What God is this? Turn aside from him and embrace mine. Mine is at least honest about his cruelty.
yeah,
Shit, man.
yeah. I like what you said. Like it's about sowing doubt.
Mm-hmm.
It's about sapping his will. He doesn't necessarily have to win. It just has to make him waver in his
Yep.
innocency.
Fortunately, it doesn't. Not enough, at least. But she also says something that I think is worth talking about here, Matt. She says, there's no such thing as heaven for them. Heaven's only meant for the gods, the little gods and the big gods. And I mean, like, that's not true in Christianity, right? But, like, I was wondering if we're meant to believe that could possibly be true within the universe of this book. That, like, when you die, you're just gone. There's
I don't
no
know.
heaven.
It's a really interesting question. You know, despite these books having a really elaborate cosmology and us having seen a lot of it, I don't know if I can say most quite yet, but I feel like we've read a lot of books about the greater King cosmology. King's been extremely vague about the nature of the afterlife. I can think of
Mm-hmm.
very few places where it's clear, where where we even have evidence that there even is one. I'm having a hard time even calling any to mind right now.
Sure.
Um, so it's entirely possible. I mean, I think he likes to leave it ambiguous, though. I think he likes to leave that as a matter of like, no, you don't ever get to know the answer to that. That is something you have to take on faith,
Mm-hmm.
or not. But it's your choice. There's no. It would be too convenient for you to just know the answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. So eventually David gets to the top of the Viet Cong lookout where he finds a young man wearing a Yankees cap waiting for him. This is the only person that David and thus we do not recognize in the land of the dead, and it's an identity that we do not learn here in this chapter. But he's like this like cool guy. He's like wearing jeans and a t-shirt and some big cool sunglasses on and he's jamming out to rock and roll. He's like the epitome of cool, at least in Stephen King's definition of what cool is. He also, Matt, has marks on his wrists, a suicide attempt, an attempt that David kind of is led to believe was a successful one, which is perhaps why he's here.
Yeah, it's I feel like I'm supposed to recognize this guy, but I definitely do not. So
yeah,
I figured you would tell me if I was indeed supposed to.
You have not like missed a huge obvious thing that you're supposed to like immediately be like, oh, this is blah blah blah. No, you have not.
This isn't some character from some other book that I've read. And
no.
it's like, okay.
no, nothing like that. You are legitimately supposed to wonder who this person is at this point.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you're good. You're fine.
Okay.
And then we get into this really interesting conversation between this guy and David, where he tells him, this is the land of the dead. Everyone here is dead except for David because he's special. And then we start talking about purpose and give answers to these questions, or at least sort of answers. He says, why did God make you? Why did God make me? Why did God make anyone? To love and serve him, David said slowly. Okay, good. It's a start anyway. And we go on from there to get some more answers that are not answers. Like, why is God cruel? Well, David says cruelty is refining. But then we also have this idea of cruelty done just for evil is called malice, that faith is love and acceptance. And the opposite of faith is not disbelief, but unbelief. I think that one of my favorite quotes in this week's reading is like the idea that like disbelief is natural. Unbelief is intentional. It is a active choice that a person is making. And I think that distinction is really, really interesting. And I think that the perhaps most wonderful little bit here of what is the spiritual state of unbelief, and of course it is desperation. I love it.
It's so good. I thought that was a great moment.
But like, this is where I struggle, Matt, because it's hard to like definitively conclude on this stuff right now, right? Like King is saying, is this a reflection of our author's like basic understanding of faith, belief, love, acceptance, cruelty, unbelief, desperation? Is this King's philosophy? Is this the book's philosophy? Is everything that David's being told here just unquestionably right? I don't know. And I don't think we can know really until the end. Yeah.
I mean, it works for David, right? Or it works well enough for David in the story for him, but like, I don't feel like this is meant to be speaking to the reader and to just have us go, hey, wow, thanks, Mr. King. You've resolved all possible future spiritual crises for me by providing me this wisdom. Like, I don't think that's what he's trying to do. But like you said, what he is trying to do, I'm not entirely clear on yet. And I think, I mean, it's funny. This is one of those books where I think from almost the very beginning, I have been of the opinion of like, too soon to say what we're doing here, because it's all going to depend on, who wins. How dark of a book is this going to be? Because that's
how they win too, I think.
Yeah, and how they win. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. Because that's going to tell us like what we were doing the whole time.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it is like, I think these are interesting things, and we could have like philosophical, like I would love to spend an hour having a philosophical discussion with you about the concept of cruelty being refining, that like the reason why bad things happen to good people in this world is because God is molding you and shaping you and training you to deal with other things. Like that is a common talking point amongst people of faith, and it's one that I always struggle with. Like honestly is a thing that I struggle with. I think it's an interesting concept, but like part of me is just like, that's really fucked up, man.
Yeah. I mean, I struggle. I think, I mean, it kind of reminds me of some of the discussions that were happening in the subreddit the other day where like a lot of things make just absolute sense if you just take for granted that there is an afterlife and that you get literal eternity in paradise. If it's like, of course, you can tolerate a little bit of cruelty and difficulty on earth if your reward is infinite paradise. So just like, okay, well, what if I'm less than certain of that outcome? Suddenly it seems a lot less, cosmically just, right? So
Yeah, I mean, I guess the conclusion of this section this week is, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, yeah.
So the man then takes David on a flying trip to Desperation, and we see everything, including the China Pit. We get some exposition on how they accidentally blew it open with some blast charges and released the evil in there. We get some really detailed information on how mining works, which
Yeah.
is interesting. Like, they go in a lot of detail for this kid, and we're like, okay, cool, thanks.
It was really almost funny how it was like, now hold on, I know you're being actively strangled to death, but here's some really interesting engineering details about this mine. I think it's kind of, yeah, it's very interesting. It really reminded me of Insomnia, by the way, where it's like we're going on a spirit quest and we're going to talk a lot. We're going to talk a surprising amount.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot 90s King, right? There's a lot of like similarities between Insomnia and this book.
Yep.
For sure. There's also this, though. There will be no sweetening this earth. It must be eradicated, sown with salt and plowed over. Do you know why? Because it will spread? No, it can't. Evil is both fragile and stupid, dying soon after the ecosystem it's poisoned. Then why? Because it's an affront to God. There is no other reason.
Hardcore.
That's really interesting, playing with stakes here, right? Is like, well, is this thing going to take over the world if we leave it? No.
Nope.
Nah. It's just going to kill some people and then probably burn out. But it's bad, and we cannot allow bad to exist in this world.
Yeah, there doesn't need to be a sort of instrumental justification. The end unto itself is that this evil must be destroyed. It is an affront to God.
I love that shit. I love there is no other reason.
Yeah.
Like, don't even try to find, like, you reader, don't even try to find it's an affront to God.
No, yes, I genuinely like this, because it's like this is true deontology, right? Like it's not like, well, you see, religion is really just a wrapper that we wrap around consequentialism, where, really what we all want to do is we want to do good, and we want to do good to our neighbor. And the name we call that is God, and God is the name for your love of your fellow man. And this book is like, no, it's not. God is a specific dude who has desires, and he wants this place burned to the ground because he hates it.
He hates this fucking place. And maybe he even helped the people expose the evil so he could bring other people in here to fucking kill it.
Yeah, probably.
Because he's like, there's this evil sitting down there, and it's pissing me off that it's still here, and dig it up and then fucking kill it.
Yeah, just because nobody else knows it's there doesn't mean God doesn't know it's there.
Yep.
And that's absolutely, I love that.
It's great shit. I love it so much. So as they wrap up, Matt, David realizes one thing. Everyone in the land of the dead is dead, and yet David saw old Reverend Martin, which means that, he's dead too. We learn that despite the fact that his drinking got worse and worse by the end of his life, what actually killed him was the old classic not waiting for 30 minutes after eating to get into the pool or ocean in this case. He went into the water too soon after lunch, and he went out too far, and he drowned. He's dead. So that's Reverend Martin, Matt, the hand-picked tool to train David on the importance, the power, and the love of God, drowned in the ocean.
Maybe this is why I was thinking about John the Baptist, actually, because it's incredibly darkly funny that this guy is more like the John the Baptist figure, where he sort of is like this discoverer and tutor of David, who in this metaphor is Jesus, and then he drowns. He's the Baptist. But he drowns, and he's dead now. I love that. That's some dark shit. I love that too.
Yeah. That begs the question, like, why this guy? and like, is it really he did what he could, and then we didn't need him anymore? So go. I mean, like, this guy's a fucking mess. Like, he's an alcoholic that, his drinking is played up every time we reference him, and it's like gets worse and worse and worse over time, and then he just dies. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
What are you doing, God? What, like, why this guy? It's like, was this guy the best equipped person to give David the knowledge he needed to go into the situation? I guess so, because he was the one, right? It's just
Yeah.
so fascinating.
And did he have to die? Like, did God kill him? Did
or
God need him
rather,
to
God
be
was just
here?
keeping him alive long enough and then released his protection spell.
Possibly. I mean, it's possible that he was like, well, I need a guy who's going to show up in the dream. So he's gonna have to die sometime in this like 1 week period where David is on vacation, but not too soon. I don't know. It's very like it does seem very mean, right? It's like it's more cruelty. It just feels very cruel. But it's like, really, like this guy too. Everybody David knows who's been named is dead, except his dad.
Yeah, this is why I struggle with the cruelty as refining thing, right? It's like, oh, David, you got to learn an important lesson from Reverend Martin, and it helped. It seems cruel, but it helped refine you. Great. What about him?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, I'm very glad that my child dying of cancer like taught us all how to come together as a family and lean on each other and help each other in these terrible times. But like, what about the kid that just died?
Yeah. Right. This has always bothered me. Like this is the thing where this like meditator was being like, and you can if you're, you can accustom yourself to the idea that you're all alone in the world by just noticing that you're all alone right now, actually. And really this state is no different from if everyone you loved was dead. And I'm like, the fuck are you talking about? The thing that's sad if everyone you know is dead is that they're dead, not that they're not right here. Like, this is a weirdly common way of thinking about like interpersonal like matters for spiritual people. It really bothers me actually because I'm like, no, I'm not actually sad because I'll never see the person again. I'm mostly sad because they'll never experience anything again.
Yeah.
That to me is what's sad about death, actually, personally. But anyway,
I mean, this is so tricky because like people are going through like the worst possible thing they could ever go through. Like in the example I just picked up, you've just lost your child, right? And like I have always like gotten so pissed off at like the heaven needed another angel sentiment. Like that has always pissed me off. But like if you're a parent that has lost your child, like anything that you can have that can help you process the horrible feelings that you're feeling right now is the most important thing in the world for you, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it's very easy for me to balk at these ideas, but like I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. Sure. I just don't personally buy it, but I totally I agree. I would never like begrudge anyone something like that if they needed it. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that's the Reverend. Thanks, guy. So we end the chapter on an argument as David is basically yelling at this guy, therefore via God. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here. I pulled this whole big section. I don't want to read it all, but there's stuff in here that I think is worth talking about. Like he says, I don't care, even if he didn't kill his mother and sister. He stood aside and let it happen. And the guy says, that's not true either. And we're like, wow. He doesn't expand on that, right?
Yeah, he doesn't, and you're sort of left in the position of like, okay, is this one of those classic theodicy points where it's like, well, then he's not omnipotent, right? It's like, if, and maybe, and I think the truth is in King's Cosmos, he's not omnipotent.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, that's neatly resolved.
Yeah.
But
like, and that's where from there we go. You were put on earth to love God, no, and serve Him, no. Fuck God, fuck His love, fuck His service. God can't make you do anything you don't want to. Can't. Not won't. Can't.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, that is the big difference between God and Tack, right? Like Tack can put a thing in your hand and it makes you want to fuck someone or kill someone or turn into a monster and your personality seeps away. Like that is the power of this God. But the power of David's God cannot do that. But I mean, I do appreciate the irony of like, I can't make you do this, but I'm also going to relentlessly talk to you in your head until you listen to me, right?
Yeah.
Like he refused to hear anymore, yet the man's voice came through anyway. It was relentless. He would be able to escape it no more than Jonah had been able to escape God. God was as relentless as a bloodhound on the fresh scent. Like he can't make you do these things.
Yeah.
But like he's gonna do just about everything but.
Yeah, he's just not gonna let you do anything else. Yeah.
So I just fascinating stuff. I like this. Feels like the chapter, you know, from here we're moving into part 4 of the book, which is the conclusion. There's 5 chapters left. We're close to the end. We've got 2 episodes left, and this feels like the moving, like the transitioning us to the 3rd act, where a lot has been revealed, and it sort of has, but like there's still a lot of questions about all this stuff here.
Yeah, there is. It reminds me again a lot of Insomnia, where we do get a lot of answers of a sort, but they're never quite total answers. They're answers that leave question marks, and that's fine. I mean, it's like what is King gonna tell us, like the true secrets of God? Like I don't think we expect that of him, but I think what he's trying to do with these books is provide us with an interesting and somewhat new perspective on these questions, and or even just an interesting set of questions. Like that can be a good purpose of literature, is just like, have you considered these questions? Like, have you considered thinking about faith with these questions in mind? Do I have any answers? No. Or maybe I have my own answers, but maybe it would be better if you pondered faith with these questions in your mind and came to your own answers. I see that as being a valuable part of what these books are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I don't think the expectation should ever be like, this is going to give you like the definitive answer on God and why bad things happen in the world. It's just using this as a backdrop to explore those ideas. Yeah. So that is the end of chapter 5, and that is the end of part 3. We will move next week into part 4, which is titled The China Pit, God is Cruel.
Awesome. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So we'll be reading the first 3 chapters of this section next week, and then we'll finish the book the week after that. So maybe we'll have more answers to these musings we're having in a couple weeks, Matt. We'll find out.
Yeah.
All right. But first, before we wrap everything up this week, we do have to go back to our discussion question from 2 weeks ago. It was a before Christmas discussion question. And Matt, what was the question?
The question was, who's your favorite "this good guy is actually the bad guy" reveal? We had some great answers from Pear Jane. So for me, there's only one answer to this question. Prince Hans of the Southern Isles. Hans spends so much time being the good guy, from proposing to her to helping the good folks of Arendelle in the summer deep freeze, that his nasty turn hits even deeper. What's worse is he rubs it in, delivering the classic villain monologue to poor freezing Anna, who's already literally dying. He took pleasure in making her last thoughts on Earth be that her sister will die because of her. His turn is so sharp that some internet conspiracies propose that Kristoff's troll friends cast a spell on him so as to set her up with their boy. But I prefer the unvarnished, awful truth that some guys are just shitty, especially when they have delusions of grandeur and daddy issues.
Oh, Frozen.
Yep. Scott, remember that essay I wrote about this?
I do.
Yeah. I wrote an essay about Hans.
I believe the title of the essay was "Love is an Open Door into an Abyss."
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great. I mean, it's really great actually, and I agree. I love Hans as a warning, where it's like there's no. I basically say this in the essay, but it's like there's no hint beforehand. There's no the camera lingers on him as he his eyes narrow, and there's foreboding music. There's suggesting that this guy is actually bad. It's like no, he's played totally straight as the love interest, Prince Charming, and then the twist. I think is it's actually valuable, because it's some people are really, really good at being manipulative, and they don't have ominous music playing when they're around, and it's really hard to actually notice that they're totally full of shit. And there's the whole element that he like that they're like gonna get married immediately, and it's like
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, okay, that's a strange choice for a Disney film, but it's like in retrospect, you're like, oh, he was playing her the whole time. This
Yeah.
is all part of his plan.
Well, it's so cleverly done. I agree with you, because like it's played off as they're just making like a meta commentary on the absurdity of like these princess movies where
Uh-huh.
like they meet their one true love and get married right away, and that's all it is. It's just this fun. We're just having fun with this meta commentary on how absurd that would actually be in practice, and then it ends up being so much deeper than that when the guy is actually an asshole. So yeah, like you're absolutely right that it's not set up in any real way other than that is kind of there right in front of us. It's just much more insidious than we're led to believe.
Yeah, the tropes keep us from noticing how strange and bad this is.
Mm-hmm.
It's great.
Next we have Baby Can You Dig Your Sam, who says, my absolute favorite has to be Elijah Price, aka Mr. Glass in Unbreakable. He definitely gives off a weird vibe throughout the story, but he's also a wise mentor like Mr. Miyagi or Yoda, trying to convince our protagonist of his superhuman qualities. The viewer doesn't know until the end that he is the nefarious villain behind the horrible tragedies, all in his quest to find his arch nemesis and give his own life meaning. Once again, M. Night's use of color as storytelling elements is really put to excellent use. I will always enjoy answers that are M. Night Shyamalan, especially my absolute favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie, Unbreakable. Oh, this is such a good one. This is the one I was thinking of when I asked this question, by the way.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great instance of that. It's a great twist. It really makes you feel sick to your stomach because you did think of him as a kind of Yoda or Mr. Miyagi figure, and just him being the villain is just so betraying to you as the viewer,
And it's great in all the ways that these kind of heel turn reveals are, which are, it's not obvious and you would never get it, but the clues were there. Like in this one, like the comic book logic of the villain and the hero are always like opposites in their powers is like right there in front of you the entire time. You're just not thinking about it.
Yeah. I agree. It's a good movie, and M. Night Shyamalan is a genius. It's fact. It's a fact. All right.
Absolute fact. Watch Old again. Yep. Watch somebody about the beach that makes you old. It's so good. It's so good.
All right. So next answer from Like Okay. Came here to say Prince Hans too. Love the idea of introducing this concept at a young age. So often in kids' movies, the bad guy is an evil witch, like with a hairy mole and an evil laugh you can spot from a mile away. The truth is usually bad guys pretend to be good, at least at first. Bad guys don't usually show up at the door looking like Dr. Doom and saying, hello, I'm here to ruin your life. They're usually handsome, charming, and can finish your sentences or sandwiches because they get you so well. They lure you in and then only reveal their true nature later. Han sucks, but he sucks in a more believable way than many children's villains. Also, honorable mention to the short-lived innocent/good guy balloonist Henry Gale from Lost.
Oh, Henry Gale, man. Do you remember that? You probably don't even remember.
I don't remember. I'm sorry, I literally don't remember Henry Gale. So
when Ben Linus first shows up in Lost, he's pretending to be Henry Gale, a balloonist that crash landed on the island.
Yes, now I do remember. I just didn't remember that name. Okay,
mm-hmm.
I mean, Ben Linus. I don't actually think Lost just totally sucks. Ben Linus is a great character. He's a great the turn of his character is so good.
You want to hear my newest one now?
Yeah.
What if Game of Thrones isn't actually that bad? I saw a tweet the other day that was like, I can't believe everyone's just written off the entirety of Game of Thrones because there were like 3 bad episodes at the end. And I was like, well, it was more than 3. But then my second thought was,
no,
do I have to revisit the show?
I don't think that's so unreasonable. I mean, I think everybody that show was everyone's obsession for several seasons. And I think it did become gradually worse. And then the last season, like, made you retroactively feel dumb for ever liking it, but it's not all bad for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we tend to like, and we talk about this with books and things all the time. Like, we tend to judge a thing by its ending more than anything else. I mean, I think How I Met Your Mother, a show I deeply loved for many, many seasons, is a perfect example of this, that they just completely flubbed the end of it. And like, that doesn't take away the enjoyment that you had throughout the rest of it.
Yeah.
But however, unfortunately for you and everyone else, Lost's ending is perfect. And so there's no reason not to like it.
It's not even the ending. It's the, okay, whatever. We're not
I
going to talk about this now.
I know.
I
We'll
just
talk
wanted
about it in detail one day.
Yeah, right. I mean, sure. I just wanted to say about this answer specifically, the bit where they're singing the song and one of them goes, "We finish each other's." No, he says, "We finish each other's," and then she says, "Sandwiches," and it's like, that's obviously not what he was going to say. He was going to say sentences, because why the hell would you say sandwiches? And he's like, "That's what I was going to say." And in the moment, you're like, "Oh, how charming!" And then later, you look back on that moment, and you're like, "Oh, that's a perfect instance of him just like rolling with whatever to make her feel like they're soulmates."
Yeah.
When actually,
the one perhaps hint you have of the nefariousness.
Yeah.
Of this is that funny joke line. Yeah.
Yeah. And really only obvious in retrospect, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Shortstop 88 says, surprising no one, One Piece has like 4 I'm just kidding. I love you, man. 4 or more instances of a good guy is actually a bad guy. It's a long series, kind of expected, and each time has varying reasons / outcomes from these heel turns, so it doesn't get stale. One of the smaller instances of this is actually near the beginning of the series, and it appears in the later half of the live action season. Unfortunately, as far as Matt and Scott have said, they're only 1 or 2.5 episodes into the show, respectively, so I can't talk about it. 4 episodes. Thank you very much. I'm on the 4th one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Scott has officially watched more of an anime than I have.
No. It's not an anime. It's live action.
No, it's an anime.
It's a live action anime.
It's a live action anime. That's a kind of anime. I don't understand. I don't understand the problem.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I don't think I've watched the episode that they're talking about here, though, because I don't remember any specific thing like that.
I don't I know nothing about One Piece, so I assume that everything is inside One Piece, though, that it's just like a kind of fractal Borges maze of stories.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's no other. It has to be,
because it has hundreds of thousands of episodes, as far as I know. So yeah, it's in there somewhere. All right, Toxie that says, good guy that's actually bad. You mean overused Marvel trope, Ego, Mysterio, Obadiah, Hydra, Icarus. No, must resist my soapbox. Okay, I'm going to go with the shopkeeper in 1984. I forget his name, but he befriends Winston, sells him the diary, eventually rents him his safe room above his shop so he and his little lady can have true feelings discussions free of surveillance. Alas, the shop, the room, his friendship, it's all a trap, and he is part of the thought police all along.
Stupid shopkeeper.
Yeah, I really do need to read that book.
Read? You didn't read it in school?
No, I didn't read that in school.
Wow. We read it senior year.
I'm jealous.
No, you should. It's a good book.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Next we have book club? 1984 book club?
Yeah, let's do it.
It is the 40th anniversary of the date that the year that the book was titled after.
The horrible dystopian future. Yeah.
Feels like it's a perfect year to do it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aqua Lungfish says the movie The Prestige has a great "the good guy was really bad all along." In fact, it has 2. The movie is about a pair of rival magicians who spend the whole time, spanning many years, trying to figure out each other's tricks and one-upping each other. Both the main characters oscillate between being bad and good several times, so your sympathy switches between the two. I don't want to spoil it because it's an amazing movie, so I won't say any more, but the interplay of these two characters sells a lot of the movie. It does. That's a good Christopher Nolan movie.
Yes.
I wish there were more of them.
Yeah, that is just one of those great movies, right? I mean, I often share your feelings about Chris Nolan, but that movie is just like a solid movie. Cool. Good answer. I wouldn't have thought of that one as an instance of this, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, we can't talk. I don't want to spoil it.
Yeah, me neither.
But yes, no, I think that's good.
Little Dork 87 says, without a doubt, I have to say Dr. William Weir from Event Horizon. Early in the movie, we are made sympathetic to Weir's character by the introduction of his tragic loss. We watch along as the entire crew questions their sanity throughout the film. Even though I have seen the movie literally hundreds of times, the depiction of Weir's descent into madness at the end of the film still rocks me to my core. Side note, it was very difficult to write this without too many spoilers. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, and everyone should watch it at least once.
Wow. Have you've seen Event Horizon, right?
Oh yeah.
That's a stupid question. Of course you have. I love this movie so much.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. Sam Neill's portrayal as this character is so good. It's such a gnarly, weird, like the spoilers, I guess. The sequence where the comatose for most of the movie, youngest member of the crew gets sucked into the vacuum of space will haunt me forever. Like when he's like bleeding from his eyes. Ugh.
Yeah. It's a very it's horror in the purest form, where it's like, it's not even necessarily that there's a monster. It's just upsetting. It's just like, how do we just make you feel really bad? Yeah, let's just do all of those things.
Yep. Great movie. Last we have E-Man 9001, who says, my first reaction was to once again bring up Griffith from Berserk, but since you said favorite and that betrayal is heartbreaking nightmare fuel, I will instead say the betrayal in part 1 of the Korean manhwa, The Tower of God. They go on to say major spoilers ahead, and we're not going to read those spoilers because I have no idea. I think, Matt, I think we can safely say, like, our decision with spoilers is if we've seen the thing, we'll probably read the spoilers because we can at least navigate around it to know how much of a spoiler it isn't. But if we haven't read or seen the thing, we have no way of doing that. So we're just going to avoid this. Yeah. I didn't know what a manhwa was before this answer, though. And so we did learn something today.
I didn't either. Yeah.
It's just a Korean comic book, by the way.
That's cool. We're not like perfectly consistent with this policy, but I do tend to think like the goal of the discussion question answer section is not just to like spoil everything for everyone. So we try to exercise some discretion there at the margins. Yeah.
But go check that if you've read this before and want to see E-Man's longer response on that. It is on the subreddit.
That's right.
Go check that out. All right. Thank you everyone who sent those in. Those were a lot of fun. I always leave these things, like the stuff I've seen, I just want to immediately go rewatch it. Like I really want to go watch Event Horizon right now. Maybe I will.
Yeah, me too. I'm going to go watch it right now.
I have to watch Barbie for the podcast, but maybe we'll put that on pause while I rewatch Event Horizon at midnight. This kind of like great.
Yeah, it'll be a double feature like Barbenheimer, except it's Barbie Horizon.
Event Barbrizon.
Yeah, it rolls right off the tongue.
All right, that is it for this week's question. Next week's question is going to be a nasty one. Matt, what is next week's question?
Favorite instance of incredible gross body collapse / decomposition in film, books, and TV?
In honor of Audrey Wyler, may she rest in peace, let's get nasty. There's so many examples of this. A lot of them are Cronenbergian, and they're great.
Yeah, I look forward to reading your gross, disgusting answers next week.
Just make sure you don't eat before we record next week.
Yep.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us this week. As we said, we will return with part 4. It's not actually the final part. There is a part 5 that's kind of serves as a capper, but this is the climax we're moving into now. Part 4 is the climax. We'll be reading and discussing chapters 1 through 3 of part 4, The China Pit, God is Cruel.
Awesome. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia is the place to go to hang out and answer that discussion question.
And please make sure you subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done that already. Go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube too while you're doing subscribing. That's where our book club's at. And you don't want to, everyone forgets about the live recording. Sometimes life is busy, you forget, but you know how you won't forget? Press that subscribe button, and then we'll be at the top of your subscription page when we're live. And you'll be like, oh yeah, Star Wars Heir of to heir to the to or of the empire?
Heir. Oh no! Now you've screwed it up for me. Oh no! Heir to the Empire. It's Heir to the Empire.
Okay, that one. We're talking about that book. I can't wait. Let's go. So yeah, subscribe to us on YouTube as well.
Yeah. And if you like our show and you want to support us, then please consider donating on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia. Like we said earlier, we'll be wrapping up I guess we have wrapped up the other levels of the tower feature, and we're starting this month. We're going to be beginning Castle Talks. So look forward to that. And if you're interested in getting in on the ground floor of that series, then please join today.
Man, the name of that show sounded way cooler until you said it. And that sounds kind of
change it now, huh? Sorry. Yeah.
Just kidding. It's great. And I'm so excited to talk about this weird show with you. But if you are not one of those people that can afford to do that right now, that is absolutely fine. There are still tons of ways, as we always say, to help us out. Share the podcast. Please keep sharing. Please keep doing that. There are, I'm sure, people that love these books that haven't found what we do yet. So share it, and maybe they will. You can also leave us rating and reviews. This week's review comes from Hans N from Audible. They give us 15 stars. And they say, I have journeyed to the tower 4 to 5 times now and just stumbled upon this podcast. I was not ready to take the next trip to the tower just yet, as it has been less than a year since my last, and I have not yet finished exploring other levels of the tower, and was not mentally ready to revisit Roland and Company. I have been trying to explore other writers, but the drawing of the tower is so strong, and I find myself being pulled back to it. I am not actively reading along, but this podcast has brought me right back to the journey. The two of you have opened my mind's eye to what else is really going on with our little quartet. Thank you so much for your insight that has taken me to new depths of the tower story. Well, you're welcome, Hans. Thank you for your kind words. I hope this review, I think, is a little old because we're looking at the Audible ones that have been there for a while. I bet Hans is rereading the tower now too.
I bet so.
Great.
I love how earnest and like spiritual people are about the Dark Tower. It's really just heartwarming to me to see.
Yeah. No, me too. By the way, I've decided that I need to reread the entire series before our trip to Bangor. So I'm going to be doing that. Maybe I'll make some like side content on Patreon or something talking about my reread. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
All right, folks. That is going to do it for us. What?
Do it. Yeah.
You just didn't seem that enthused about it, man. No. Sure. I'm not going to read it, but go for it, man.
Scott, we got a lot to do over the next few months. I don't know if you knew that, but
I do.
Yeah,
we have so much to do.
Fit in the entire Dark Tower. Why not? Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll pull a mat and just listen to it.
Okay.
And not read it, and just take up jogging.
That would be fine.
Two birds. All right, folks, we'll see you right back here next week as we move towards the end of Stephen King's Desperation. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.